Guys, really happy to have my friend, good friend, Dan Alexander on today. So Dan did 10 years in the Royal Marines, 3 years as a junior rank, and then 7 years as an officer. So a wealth of experience, really good guy, know him personally. We lived together at a point, weekends, went to the same church, trust him a lot. And I know that he's got really good morals, lots of experience, and he's very good at his job as well. So Dan, thanks for coming today, bud.
Thanks for the introduction, Sam. And I was thinking before we really get going, I know it's I'm over in the US at the moment, but I know it's Armed Forces Day over there today.
Yep.
So I just wanted to, before we began, take a moment to just acknowledge those who are out and about at the moment. There are people who are very much in harm's way, and if they get to see this video, I think it'd be good for them to know that we appreciate them. We're praying for them, and we're very proud of everything they're doing for us. So
100%.
Yeah.
Well said, mate. Well said. Yeah, it's very easy to forget that when we have like a sort of a sheltered society, and the reason we are sheltered is because of the sacrifice of many brave men and women. And so, they're out there doing the business for us right now, and we're able to sit here and enjoy the fruits of that. So it's amazing. So you're out in North Carolina, Dan.
Yeah.
I know that was your plan from I've known you for 12 years, and that was one of the first things I think you said that you wanted to do. You've done it. You're out the other side of the Royal Marines.
Big changes.
How's it been? How have you? We'll sort of reverse on ourselves.
Yeah,
how's
sure.
it been leaving the Marines after sort of 10 years?
Yeah, so I guess I turned 30. So I quit the Marines and I moved continents. So big change all at once. It's a weird one because it's so recent that I sort of still feel like I'm on extended leave. Still, in the back of my mind, I'm still sort of, about to go back and slot into, my comfort zone. And I think the reality that I'm now out of that organization and stepping into a new season of life hasn't probably really sunken in properly yet. And I think perhaps that's because the degree of change in my life is so extreme that it feels like a deployment almost.
Yeah.
It feels like it's like the Marines have sent me somewhere and, you're just getting on with it. But, the reality is that I'm very unlikely to be going back into that. So it's mixed emotions, really.
Have you struggled with it?
No, not particularly. I've reflected on this a lot because it's not really until you sort of step away from your life that you sort of begin to see things in a different way. And I think, one of the things that 10 years in the Marines gave me was an ability to adapt very quickly, an ability to cope with stress and uncertainty very effectively. And so I feel that I've been very well equipped to sort of embrace the change, but equally I've got to give credit elsewhere. I've been very warmly welcomed over here. I've sort of parachuted into an immediate group of friends. I'm intellectually or academically well prepared for the studying I'm doing. I'm having a good time. But
awesome, mate.
You left the Corps a few years ago. What a shocking system it is.
I think you've prepared yourself a lot better than I did. I think I was quite naive coming out, and you were sort of there in the process of it. I struggled for the first sort of 9 months coming out of the Marines. And simply because I hadn't prepared myself. I thought I've been a Royal Marine. I walk into a job. I sort of had a rough idea of what I wanted to do, but not entirely. I was actually going to go into maritime security and sort of bottom fell out of that. And I learned a lot in that period, and the Royal Marines set me up massively for Civvy Street as well. So
there's so much I want to say about we'll get to it, I'm sure. But one of the things that has sort of struck me very starkly is that I've very much taken for granted, I think, being almost exclusively surrounded by elite people and high performers.
Yeah.
Who subscribe to a very particular way of doing business with excellence, consistency. And so I'll be sat in a meeting, for example, and my instinct is to behave in a particular way and to expect other people to, conduct that conduct that meeting in a particular way, like I'm used to, and make decisions in ways that I'm used to, very clear, clinical, efficient. And people will be talking about how they're feeling, and like they'll go down rabbit holes, and I'm just sat there like tearing my hair out, like, firstly, you're late. I can't even get past the fact that you were late. So there's a huge adjustment.
You don't have feelings. If you're late, you don't have feelings.
What do you mean you haven't prepared your points? So I've got to really like zip it and just be like, breathe and be like, Dan, not everybody has had essentially the world-class training in how to think, in how to communicate, and that that I've had, and to have a bit of grace for people, and understand as well that I'm the odd one out here. I need to get with the program in terms of I'm not perfect, put it that way. So a bit of humility as well, which is a must.
But
when you're a commando,
exactly, it's a hard one because you want to bring those standards into the workplace, and you want to bring it into your own business. But then you're right; you've got to have a sense of like understanding that what the last 10 years that you've lived isn't real life. It's like a bubble of, like you say, excellence and eliteness, and to come out, it probably feels a bit like what, like, say, someone like Lionel Messi would feel like. He's unbelievable and everyone around him's like great, but he's just like a different. This sounds
that sounds a little bit too grandiose. I think
everyone around you sucks.
I just think what I'm trying to say is,
I know what you're saying.
You're in a very, very selective organization that has very strong identity and very, very defined ways of doing things. And then to step out of that, it opens your eyes to the reality that there are way more ways of doing things than you realized. And maybe your way is more effective in some ways, but it certainly won't be in every way. And that's something that you'll certainly learn in the Marines, is that there are many ways of doing things. You don't have a monopoly on the best way of doing things. And understanding that is a very important thing. And when you're stepping into a dangerous place when you start to believe your own hype, and you start to you start to let things go to your head, and that's a very easy thing to do, especially for young Marines who've recently passed out as well. You've made it. You think you're invincible, and you lose that learning attitude. And so I regard sort of this early part of stepping into this new season as kind of my new CTC, my new sort of training phase into the civilian world. And I'm trying to step into this new season with the same attitude of humility and absorbing information that I stepped into when I first joined the Marines.
I think it's really good to take a lot of the practical points from the Marines into Civvy Street and really cling on to them. Things like, adherence to detail, personal hygiene, punctuality, and all those things like that. But then to look and go, okay, what things do I need to leave at the door? Because there is some things, I remember when I remember when I first started PTing, and I'd have, like, say, Maureen would come through the door, and I'm like, Maureen wants to train like I train. She wants to get thrashed every session and stuff like. And my retention of clients was quite poor because I just thought people just wanted to get thrashed.
Did you ever down on the estuary having a crawl through the mud?
That was.
How much do you want to be here?
Not at all. So I had to learn really quickly, like, okay, not everyone wants to, like, bleed from their eyes every time they do training. So and also I think another one's humor.
You've got to leave,
Yeah.
especially coming to America. You've got to
Yeah.
leave the British humor behind, let alone the royal humor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the most PC humor or PG, but
So
that's why it's so exciting when you see another bootneck. Like,
yeah,
just like,
absolutely.
hooray, we can be ourselves.
Yeah. Actually, I had a friend of mine who's a bootneck who left a few years ago. He's now over here, and he came over for the weekend, and it's just like, yeah, what you'll come to understand, I suppose, your guys who are joining the Corps, is that you're stepping into a tribe, and you feel safe within that circle of guys. And when you step away from the tribe, you're away from the wolf pack. And there are absolutely positive and negatives to that. But you're forever set aside, and you're forever marked as one of the brotherhood, and you'll always feel that draw to others who have stepped into that tribe as well. And so I think, and one of the so before I left the military, before I left the Corps, I did a few sort of recce's into London. I thought I might go into the city, or so I went. I spent actually half a day at Citibank with a friend who's now a banker, really just to understand like what civilians do on a normal working day, because I just don't know this stuff. And he took me on a tour and basically introduced me to all the ex-bootnecks who worked in that skyscraper. Like,
really?
we did a tour, yeah, and you just see their eyes light up when they see another bootneck, because they're just like, it's like a glass of cold water on a hot day for them, because they can immediately relax and immediately sort of, figuratively speaking, high five, and so I think that's probably indicative of what a profound sense of identity that being in the Corps gives you.
Definitely.
And to step away from that is an intimidating thing. Yeah.
So where did it all start for you? So obviously, you were in the TA for you joined the TA, didn't you? At like what?
Yeah.
16,
17. 17? I was doing my A levels at the time. Yeah. I suppose it actually probably goes further back for me, because actually I was originally in the Army Cadets.
Right.
So throughout my teen years, that was very sort of what I sort of really focused on, if you like, in my teen years. And that was excellent, because what that did was, I suppose it brought me under the sort of mentorship of some really excellent guys, actually. And at that impressionable age, you meet someone who's in their 20s or 30s who you look up to, and you're just like, I want to be like them. And so there were some characters like that within the cadets and that sort of steered me in the direction of the military. So then when I was 17, I joined the TA. I did that for a couple of years whilst doing my A levels, and did a bit of travel and all that sort of stuff. But I sort of wrestled with what part of the military I wanted to join. Because in the TA, that's sort of a platform to sort of observe the rest of the military to a degree. So I was probably a little bit more informed than the average teenager going into the Marines. And again, so it's hard to know. When people ask, why did you join the Marines, or questions along that vein, it's not an easy question to answer at all. And it's also while I was in, I always used to think, well, there were reasons why I joined, but there are also reasons why I stay, or did stay for so long. And for a long time, I wrestled with answering this question, because there are so many different reasons that you can choose and pick to express, depending on who you're talking to, but they're not the reason. They're not the individual reason why you joined or why you stay. And so what I came to realize is that actually there's a spectrum of reasons. And on one end of the spectrum, you've got kind of the shallower reasons that are sort of kind of infantile at best. Why? Because I like playing with cool toys. I like wearing night vision goggles. I like and then you come further into the center, and there's sort of deeper reasons, and these are the sort of like, well, I want a lifestyle where fitness is valued and travel, and so those are the sort of more meaningful, if you like, but they're still not really that deep. And then it's not until you get to the really sort of deep end of the spectrum where you start talking about, what are the core and deep sort of almost philosophical reasons that I'm here. And to understand those reasons, you need to sort of look within and understand who you are, what your values are, what your place in life is, who you want to become. And so for me, it was, as a Christian man, I see my role in life is to take all the gifts and abilities and passions that I have as a person and employ those to the greatest positive effect that I can.
Yeah.
And therefore, I need to develop myself into someone who can exploit that and place myself on a platform that is going to enable me to do that. And for me, the Royal Marines was probably the best platform that aligned with who I was and what my gifts and abilities and passions were, and that would enable me to develop into who I wanted to become, and conduct those things that and step in and influence those things I cared about in life.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Massively. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I like jumping out of helicopters as much as every other guy does. It's all, it's awesome. And I love being part of a team, and leadership we can talk about later and all that kind of stuff. They're all good things, but they're not the single reason.
Yeah.
It's the holistic sort of whole package of who you are and where you're going in life. And I think that's why, before you join the military, you need to examine what your values are, what you think the purpose of your life is, and ask, does stepping into the military take me and develop me into the person that I want to be?
Yeah.
And look, we have this idea, I think, in Western culture that, you finish school and you go on your gap year and you go and discover who you are, and you discover, what you like. And, I think that's true to a degree, but I've come to believe that actually you don't discover who you are, you shape who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
You choose the ideal and the standard that you wish to reach, and then you work to create that.
Yeah.
So I didn't discover that I was good at being a Marine. I went to the Commando training center and put myself into the fire to forge a good Marine. I didn't discover that. That was built and that was created.
Yeah.
So understand who you want to be. Don't let the world in your life shape, decide that for you.
I think that's such an important point, and something that I really want to get across to sort of the younger generation in a non-patronizing way, because I think very much in like this sort of Instagram society, it's like, like be who you want to be and be what, and all this. And it's actually like, well, like I say this a lot, that people are trying to make their lives as easy as possible to make it as enjoyable or as fun as possible. But actually I found that like through the hardest times of my life and through the times where you are being refined by the fire, that's where true sort of joy comes from, and true like identity and purpose. And if you try and take all the hard things in your life out of your life, well, no wonder there's mental health problems, and so people have lacking purpose and all these things.
So I think there's a really important distinction to draw. There are hard times and there are bad times. Now, hard times are when you're in the jungle, lying on the floor, getting eaten by ants, and you've got to remain still because you're in an ambush and you're waiting for the enemy to walk past at some point within the next couple of days. That is hard times. Bad times are when you don't have direction in life, when you're feeling out of shape, you're not getting up in the morning, you've got an unhealthy relationship. Now, those bad times are also hard, but they're hard because they're bad.
Yeah.
The hard times that I look back on are some of the best times I've had.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate to go to Southeast Asia, go to Brunei and train as a jungle warfare instructor. Some of the hardest times I've had, utterly exhausting. And I was new to that tropical environment. You're deep in the jungle for days and even weeks at a time. It's very, very, very physically demanding and mentally demanding. But I probably look back on that as probably absolutely one of the highlights.
Yeah.
And those hard times really, they shape you, they develop character, they develop a whole load of positive qualities in a way that bad times do not.
And the thing is, when you're going through those hard times, you rarely sit there and think, this is horrendous, but do you know what? I'm going to get loads of benefits from this. I'm going to in 2 years time, I'm going to reap benefits. I'm going to see the positive. You don't, you just focus that you just think this is hard. This
you just get me out here.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. And I think, it's times like that where, self-discipline, teamwork and good leadership are absolutely key. And those are the qualities that the Marines absolutely value. I remember because you were in the Corps before I joined, about a year before, and I was going on to my PRMC, and I remember you saying, Dan, remember when you're hanging out, the PTI doesn't want to see like your baby face. He wants to see you stoically just getting on with it.
Yeah.
Because the display, don't feel like a display of how much you're suffering is going to break any ice or make it easier. Sometimes you just got to get on with it.
Because that PTI is looking at the guys going, in a year or 2 years time, I could be front line with this lad. And that's what he might not be thinking that necessarily in that moment, but when they're picking people to go into recruit training, that's what they're thinking. He doesn't want to see you, he's not going to feel sorry for you. He's going to think, I can't trust this lad on the front line. When it goes wrong, this lad's going to crumble. That's what he's thinking. He's not thinking, I feel sorry for this lad. Let's chill out a little bit.
Yeah, because he knows you're suffering.
He's been there. He's been there before many times.
Yeah.
He's not a PTI for no reason. He's gone through his fair share of tough, hard training sessions.
And what we're looking for is those who can suffer in silence.
That should be the Royal Marines punchline. That's the motto of the Royal Marines.
Yeah, because when you're lying on that jungle floor getting eaten by ants.
Yeah.
But you're having to remain completely silent.
Yeah.
Because if the enemy find out that you're there before they step into your trap, you're all going to die.
Yeah, because you didn't have the discipline and you didn't value your friends' lives over your emotions. It's like
over your itchy crotch.
Yeah, I remember in Afghan, I don't normally tell Afghan stories on here because I just think it's a bit.
Well, I love listening to them, Sam. Carry on.
But I mean, this isn't really anything to do with ops, but we would all take our turns staying behind at the CP, the checkpoint, while lads did ops. So it was my turn to stay behind and look after the checkpoint. Yeah. And there was three or four of us on Sanger duty, on watch for 2 days. And it was literally, mate, the routine was 2 hours on, 1 hour off for 2 days. And it's probably the hardest 2 days of my life, because it was just
absolutely.
You shut your eyes and then you're getting shook. like, it's your turn, and you're like,
Yeah.
what the heck?
You're like, no, I've only just come off.
Yeah,
I swear,
like,
you've got it wrong. It's John.
And literally, he's like, no, he's on Sanga duty already. It was literally, and I remember saying to the guy, like, because you'd fall asleep on each other, like, because you were just so good. I was like, do not leave my side until I'm walking out the door with you, because I will just, and like,
you can literally sleep talk and be like, yeah, I'm coming.
oh mate, yeah.
I used to tell people in those situations, I used to tell people, like, look, I need you to physically drag me, because it's not that I'm willing. It's that like monkey brain will just say whatever it needs to say to get itself out of that situation. And if it needs to say, yeah, I'm awake, I'm coming, it will say that and not mean it.
Mate, if my brain can get 30 seconds extra sleep by telling the world's biggest lie, it will do it. So don't freaking let it.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's good, great insight, mate. So going back, I mean, there's so much I want to talk about, but I want to try and capture as much of it as we can.
Yeah.
So you're TA, 17 years old, TA. You did what, 2 years, was it, mate?
2 or 3 years, yeah.
Okay.
So,
and then you get to the end of your TA time, and you're like, the natural progression from TA is obviously the army, but you chose the Marines. What happened there?
Yeah. So going back to what I was talking about that spectrum.
Yeah.
I suppose I viewed the Marines as the most demanding, the most mentally and physically sort of demanding organization that I could step into from where I was. And I was also shaped, I was friends with you at that point. I was friends with Chris, and who's obviously a friend of yours as well. And he is very much an inspirational figure to me. And so it was just an obvious next step, it really was. And I remember actually being dropped at the train station in Exeter by you and Chris. Actually, I think we had just gone for dinner or whatever. And I remember before I stepped out of the car to go on my PRMC, which I don't have anymore, but it was like a 3-day, thrashing to see if you were fit enough. I remember before. Shoot. He's still there.
Got
it. So before I stepped out of the car to jump on the train at Exeter, I remember Chris turning to me and saying, it's all you now, Dan. You've done the prep. You know what you've got to do. Now just go for it. And those words, just go for it, have echoed in my mind ever since. And have they were almost permission, in a sense, to just leave everything on the table and just absolutely go 100%. And I think, why does that echo in my mind ever since? I think sometimes young men at that age need someone who they look up to, who ultimately they're trying to impress, in a sense. It could be a father, could be a mentor, and they need someone to just tell them that no one's keeping score, no one's going to tell you to do this, but you need to just absolutely go for it and not hold anything back, and commit to the decision and go and do what you're prepared to do. And I think that's something that's lacking in the lives of very many young men, and I think it's great that I'm a big supporter of the service that you provide, Sam, because I think what it does is provides a framework from which to train, which will give a young man confidence that he's doing what is required in order to go and succeed. But then also just having someone who's been there and who's done it, just say, you know what, just go for it. Like, it's all you. You know what to do. Just get it done. I think it's a very powerful thing to say to a young man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it brings back a lot of nostalgic memories of those times. Actually, for those listening, Chris was a special forces operator and massive influence in me and Dan's life. He's actually gone back into the service as a padre now, eh?
yeah, he has.
But great guy. But just amazing wisdom, stuff like that, and wisdom that can only be gleaned from doing it yourself. You can't. It's not things you can learn from a book. And the thing is, as well, is like the influence. Like, for instance, you, Dan. You know, you've done 10 years as a Royal Marine, so obviously 7 years as an officer. You can now speak into places that many people can't, into many young men and women's lives that many people won't be able to reach, because simply what you've been through and what you've experienced. And that, when you have that experience and you have that power, I think it's such a waste if it's never utilized. And you know, that's what I want to do. That's what I started Complete Commando for. I was like, I've got this experience, I've got this this knowledge. Like, if I just keep this to myself and I'm just working in Civvy Street, I'm providing for my children and stuff, like, it's wasted. And so I thought last year, do you know what? I'm gonna just go for it. And here we are. Like, we've helped hundreds of people into the Marines and continue to help them through training. We're just that, I'm always at the end of the phone for them, and hopefully just changing people's lives, which is, not me, but obviously getting them to the Marines that changes their lives. And puts them on the path to a greater life.
Yeah. And it absolutely does. I mean, I agree with that completely. I look back, albeit very recently, and look at essentially my 20s, and it was just an absolute whirlwind, an incredible experience. And it wasn't all positive by any stretch. We can talk about that and the cost of service. It's called service for a reason, and there are prices to be paid. But frankly, I look at the Corps Instagram page now, and I know that Instagram is very much a very narrow lens to look at something through. But I look at that and I think, for a 17-year-old young lad, why would you consider doing anything else? What is out there that can compare to the lifestyle that you're being offered by stepping into the fire, going and getting your green beret and joining one of the world's greatest teams? Even if you only do it for 4 years, the lifestyle that you have lived, the experiences that you have had, will set you apart for the rest of your life. And it's not all jumping out of helicopters. It's not all, night vision goggles and lasers. But that's absolutely there for the taking. And it's very much within your power to make that your focus if you want to. And so if that's what excites you, if that's what you think would be that platform that would enable you to live out your potential, then go for it. That's what I think about that.
100%. I worked in a bookies at 19 years old. My football career had not finished the way I'd wanted it to, and exactly that. I looked at the core, and I looked at my life and the route it was going. And I was like, why would I not try it? Like, why would I not go for it? Why would I not spend the next year? Well, at 18 years old, why would I not spend the next year getting ready to join this elite organization? Look at everything it can offer me compared to the route I'm going down.
I would also add to that, though, it's not the only option. There are other.
I disagree.
You're stepping into a very specific, I suppose industry might be, it's probably not the best use of the term, but you're stepping in to master a very particular set of skills. And if you want to go and develop other skills, my younger brother is in the Navy and he fixes helicopters and he absolutely loves it. And that affords him an incredible, he's also like a semi-pro skateboarder. So he spends his spare time like winning skate competitions, and then he's in the Navy fixing helicopters. And for him, it's the perfect balance. And he goes off and he's done so many different courses. He can weld things, he can drive, any number of different vehicles. He's just like, and at the moment he's on some leadership course to get promoted. So the breadth of the development that he is embracing is vast. And that's the Navy. I'm a huge fan of the Navy. I've worked with them as a Marine. I've obviously worked with them a great deal. And they've got so much to offer as well. And I can also talk about the Army with some authority, having, served in the reserves, but also I did a year of platoon command with the Rifles. So when I finished officer training, we actually passed out with more troop commanders than there were troops needing troop commanders in the Corps. Only a couple extra. And as I had already sort of done the loop, if you like, back then there was a particular cycle the different units were on. I'd sort of done a full circuit of that. And so I was an ideal candidate to go off and see what the Army were up to. So I went over to 3 Rifles in Edinburgh, and probably the best year of my life, if I'm honest.
Really? Seriously?
Oh my goodness. Oh, yes. It was absolutely fantastic. So many factors came together that year that made it an incredible experience. I just finished officer training, so I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was also, and it's also great fun to be the only one of your tribe within another tribe. And the Rifles very much are a tribe. That's one of the things I love about them, is that they have a very strong regimental identity in a very similar way to the Corps. And their guys are fantastic. They're very professional and passionate about their profession. But I think probably one of the strongest aspects is they recruit their officers really, really well. Really, really well. I think Sandhurst clearly produces a very, very capable officer. And I think a lot of the most capable officers get selected into the Rifles.
Wow.
And so I found myself amongst a cohort of exceptionally capable and professional officers, which is exactly where you want to be, having just completed officer training. And very different kind of culture, with obviously positive and negative, but overwhelmingly positive. And I took so much leadership sort of insight, if you like, from that year, and so much about how to be a good officer.
What were some of the main cultural differences between the Royal Marines and the Rifles?
Yeah, so that really goes. So CTC, Commando Training Center, is very oriented around the Green Beret. That's what you're there to achieve. Now, when you join the batch at CTC, and the batch is the annual officer intake, there's one a year. Officer training is about 64 weeks long, I think, and there's one class a year. And so when you join that, you're training to become an officer, and you're training to become a commando, and you're training to become an officer, and the two are kind of overlaid. Now, I think Sandhurst is a very different experience, because you have a really broad range of sort of like officer cadets who come together, learn to be an officer, and then they go off and become, an infantier or a pilot, and so that year or however long Sandhurst is very, very focused on what is an officer, and distinct from your profession. So there's quite a clear delineation. And I think that what that creates is a real intentionality about how they live out their officership. Whereas in the Marines, they're slightly more conjoined, if that's even the right word to use, and there's probably less emphasis on within training. There's probably less emphasis necessary within your officer identity as opposed to your commando officer identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, massively.
And therefore, it's not a criticism; it's an observation. And so one of the things I probably learned, for example, with the rifles, was excellent hosting abilities, or sort of the idea that if someone steps into your mess, you are then duty bound to host them like royalty. And that's a really, really useful social skill, something to develop. And that's I just think the rifles officers really embrace that kind of excellent gentlemanly behavior culture in a way that probably isn't quite as emphasized within the Marines, which is not to say that, a Marine officer won't obviously know how to do the same thing. It's just not quite as culturally emphasized, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Bit of a rabbit hole there, but
no,
yeah,
I think
all that to say is that it was a really formative year, and it really sort of broadened my understanding of what it is to be an officer.
I feel like there is very much like a sort of a cellular, if that's the right word, identity with the Marines. Like, we are very much on our own. Like we utilize the RAF to get us places. We use the Navy and stuff, and the Army. We work alongside the Army and things, but we are the Royal Marine Commandos, and like freaking that's just the way it is, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think because the rifles are a regiment within a service, they're probably a lot better at like overlapping and learning off each other.
Yeah, I think they get exposed to the bigger picture, but earlier. I think. Because they've gone through training with a bunch of other, random sort of services. So whereas as a Marine, you go to CTC, and then you probably won't see any of the other services exactly beyond the guys who load your bags onto the plane or who drive the ship.
Well, mate, Leckensfield, where you go when you do your driver training. Mate, that's the only time. That's the first time I ever met someone from another service, apart from like the odd naval personnel walking around Limpston or whatever. And it was like, right, lads, we stay together. You don't talk to anyone else who's not a Royal Marine. They don't want you walking on the grass, so we're going to walk on the grass. Like, it's like, it's literally like, how can we be idiots? And like, and it's just like, you look back now and you're like, it's funny, and it's like, it's bred. I think it's bred into on purpose. I think like we've got our own language.
It's part of that. It's part of that tribal identity.
Yeah.
And there are great strengths in that. Great strengths. But
there's some knock-on poor effects as well.
Yeah.
So I put on like that we were doing this interview, and has anyone got any burning questions? Loads of lads have asked what the main difference is between junior rank training and officer. In fact, I'm really interested myself.
Yeah, I knew this one would come up. It's an obvious question because there are very few people who are mad enough to go back round the buoy at Limpston. And that's an interesting one.
How many have done it? How many have been?
Probably on average 2 or 3 guys a year tops.
So basically 100 in the last 50 years have done it.
Yeah, not very many.
That's pretty crazy.
Mostly because it's a really stupid thing to do.
Yeah, mate. Like when I left Limpston, I was like, if I ever come back here for anything, like something's gone wrong.
Yeah, I used to get that fear even when I was a Marine, I used to get fear coming through the gates.
Oh, horrible.
You know, it was. I don't get that anymore, thankfully. I'm quite fond of CTC now. I think it's an
Yeah,
amazing
yeah,
place. But yeah, stepping back into that cauldron, it was a big step.
yeah,
So what are the differences? Well, to understand what the difference is, you've got to really understand um, what what is the product that they are trying to produce. Okay, so when what are the Marines? What is CTC trying to produce in recruit training? Well, it's producing an individual who is ready to step into his role within a fighting company and go to war, and everything he needs to know in order to do that. However, the product, so to speak, that CTC is looking to produce when they put an officer through training is a young officer who is ready to step directly into a leadership position within a troop, within a fighting company, and lead Marines in war. So the product is completely different.
mm,
And one of the misconceptions that I encounter fairly regularly, or used to, was that officers would go through recruit training to like week 32, exactly the same, and then they would do the other 32 weeks, and that would just be like officer stuff. That's not true. They're two very distinct courses. You've got your 32-week recruit training, which produces X, Y, and Z, and then you've got another course that's completely separate that echoes the recruits course in very many ways. A lot of the same stuff, but in a way that develops leadership ability, planning ability, and all the sort of officer stuff. So in terms of the experience, so for me, I'll talk about my recruit training experience first, and then I'll talk about my batch experience. I think, yeah, as you've already mentioned, I'd already been in the TA, which set me up very, very well, you know, because I had a lot of the basics nailed down. And that was very positive in a lot of ways, but it was negative in some ways as well, because I had a lot of the basics nailed down. I thought I had a lot of the basics nailed down, right? And some of the basics that I had nailed down were incorrect, and I thought I was clever. I thought I was cleverer than the training team at times. I didn't think I was cleverer than the training team. I thought I was clever enough to pull wool over the eyes of the training team. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Which wasn't the case. And for anyone watching, if you're wondering if something should be done a particular way or not, you probably actually already know the answer. You're just being lazy. And you'll take the easy option now, and you'll pay for it later, which is what I did on a number of occasions. So yeah, so
I think to prove it.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes I look back and I think if I could go back now and take me through training at that stage, I would probably thrash me a lot. You know. Anyway, but it wasn't all bad. I will say this: I did not enjoy recruit training at all. You know. However, whether or not you enjoy something in life is not the gauge by which we judge whether we should be doing it or whether it is good for us or not. And I know that because I endured through recruit training, which I hated pretty much every second of, but now know to be one of the greatest things I've ever done. And so so back on track, hard times recruit training, didn't enjoy it, got through it, and then my world opened up, and I had just absolutely loved it in the Corps. So anyway, yeah, so I went back.
Did you hate officer training?
No, and there's a big difference. I actually really enjoyed officer training, and I think there are a number of factors. So, firstly, I was already a Marine. I already had my Green Beret, and so I wasn't at CTC a second time to see whether I could do CTC. I wasn't there to prove to myself that I had what it took, which is one of the reasons you're there the first time. Is like, do I have what it takes to earn that Green Beret? That question had already been answered. So, and I had absolute confidence within myself that after officer training, I would be able to step into the role as a troop commander and do a good job. And so, but equally, I knew I had a lot to learn to get there. But I could trust the process. I knew that if I just stuck with that year and a half, that I'd come out the other end and I'd be good to go.
Yeah.
And the key difference between the difference between officer training and recruit training is officer training is harder in terms of the information to take on board, the physical standard that you go to. However, it's somewhat at a slower pace. You wouldn't be able to do recruit training for 64 weeks.
Yeah.
Because you would absolutely burn out. By the time that I passed out of CTC the first time, it probably took me 6 months to physically and mentally recover from the experience. I was just utterly spent.
Yeah.
Very, very robust, but very, very tired, and just rocked to the core. And so officer training, they're not looking to put you through quite such an intensively crazy experience. They're trying to develop you intellectually, physically, all at the same time. And so the pace of life and the level of autonomy and the kind of a bit more of a grown-up atmosphere. So I remember, for example, as a recruit, you get back from a training exercise, it's like, right, we're going to deservice our kit and equipment. We're going to do it in this order. Once all the weapons are clean, then you're going to go and do your webbing, and then you're going to do your bergen. It's very prescribed. And then at 16:30, we're all going to the armory. We'll put our weapons away, and then you're all going to dinner. As an officer, you get back from an exercise, and the instructors would be. This is probably a bit later on. Term 2 or 3, the instructors would be like, right, guys, what time do you want to put your weapons away this evening? What time do you want me to open the armory? And we'd be like, well, looking at the time, we'll probably need 2 hours to clean our weapons. So I don't know, 18:30, does that work? He'd be like, yeah, okay, cool, see you there. Oh yeah, and don't forget, you've got an inspection of your kit on Monday morning. And so you then had that time. You've got 2 fixed timings there. You've got armory at 1800, and you've got 0600 Monday morning where you're having an inspection of your kit. How you manage your time between now and then is down to you.
Yeah.
Now, if you completely fail to manage that time correctly, then that will be reflected on Monday morning when your kit's still wet when it's being inspected, and then you will pay. However,
would you sort team stores out in that time as well? Would that be?
So a lot of so long-winded way of saying a lot of the responsibilities and direction that you would be prescribed as a recruit, you're expected to manage yourself as an officer. Why is that? Well, because you're developing someone into someone who's going to then take responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's just a different experience. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Massively, yeah. Do you think?
I'm not sure I answered it that well.
No, it's good. Do you think that if you hadn't done recruit training, you would have done as well in officer training and as an officer?
It's a good question. I think there are 2 answers to that. There's in general, and then there's me. I needed to go through recruit training and do a couple of years as a Marine before I developed into someone who would be an effective officer. I think if I had stepped into officer training at the time that I stepped into recruit training, I just wasn't ready. I didn't have the character. I didn't have corners that needed to be shaved down. I wasn't as physically strong. I didn't have this breadth of perspective. I didn't have the confidence. So for me, the answer is no. Absolutely needed that time to develop. Partly, I didn't go to university, remember, as well. So I think for a lot of people, they go off to university or they get a job, and that's the time that they sort of grow into their adult self. For me, that happened in the Marines. Do I think I was at a particular advantage above my peer group having been a Marine? In the very early stages, yes, because when they were learning how to clean a weapon, I knew how to clean a weapon. However, you've got to remember that these guys are selected from a very big pool of very capable young men. And my peer group going through officer training was a incredible collection of exceptionally capable and accomplished young men who caught up with the knowledge and abilities that I had very, very quickly. And what is there a great difference between the quality of officer that I made as opposed to guys who didn't do a couple of years in the Marines? Not particularly. In fact, I know for a fact that a number of them, probably a great proportion of them, are better officers than I am, for sure. Now, were there advantages to me for having been in the Marines for a few years before I became? Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just the guys seem to like it, I think, and that's probably understandable. There's an element of trust when you first arrive, and they're like, oh well, he's been in the Marines and he's been where I am, and so it buys you trust, and that's yours to lose. So I think knowing what not to say is as important as knowing what to say. And I think a little bit of experience in the Marines before you become an officer gives you that knowledge of what not to say. You see what I mean? But not a great deal of difference in my opinion.
We would obviously, I can only speak from a recruit training point of view because I never did officer training. We would get messed about all the time. Obviously, you come out and you realize it was one big game, but at the time you're like, oh God, how much more of this can we handle? And like, is there loads of that in officer training, or is there a lot more big boy rules and like, the course is hard enough that they don't need to mess you around? Good
question. Bit of both. Particularly in the early stages, much more of that sort of militarization mess around factor. You're given more rope as an officer with which to hang yourself in officer training. And I can certainly remember paying dearly for...
You can remember hanging yourself?
Multiple occasions, collectively and individually. So there's much more of a sort of, guys, you've messed up here. You have made me do this to you. Now get in the tank. Do you see what I mean? You know it's a big game. You know it's a big game, and you know how it's played. But equally, you're still going to suffer. You're still in that tank in January, waiting for the PTI to finish his debrief so that you can get out of the tank and start crawling so that you can warm up a little bit if you're lucky. Like, yes, it's a big game, but the consequences are still real. You're still going to suffer, even though it's a game. And that's what I've got to say about that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm making it sound like you suffer too much in training, but let's be real. You know,
No, I think,
I think there are
mate.
ups and downs.
Do you know what? The people who want to join the Royal Marines are
Mm,
the ones who want to suffer.
yeah,
No one joins the Royal Marines thinking this will be easy. I remember being 19 years old going, do you know what? I'm joining the Royal Marines because it's the
yeah,
hardest test.
yeah,
And I think that's
yeah,
something that, when the Royal
yeah,
Marines are recruiting, they need to remember that and
yeah,
really need to take
definitely.
hold of that. Because I
Yeah,
see a lot of like the recruitment team for the Royal Marines is very good.
mm,
But sometimes I think we lose track of like numbers
yeah,
as opposed to the correct people joining.
yeah,
And
yeah,
look,
absolutely.
I'm not in a position where I've got MPs freaking breathing down my neck, like,
Sure.
you know. So I can't sit here and judge it. But I think if the 99.99% need not apply adverts, that worked for me, and that was the reason I joined, because I was like,
Mm,
flipping heck, this
mm,
is serious.
yeah,
And I think yeah. So it does. You are, if you're going to join the Royal Marines, you're going to suffer, and you're going to suffer a lot, but it's going to be beneficial, and you'll come out of it better.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Summed
That could,
up very nicely there, Sam.
that could be the new cinema advert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, so many questions on that front. So like, I think,
Yeah.
hey, here's a maybe this puts a lot of pressure on you, but what is the hardest experience that you remember from recruit training? The hardest experience from officer
Mm.
training?
Oh man,
Is there anything you look back and go? Because there's one experience in recruit training, and even now I cringe. Like 12 years on, I'm like, oh my word! Like, is there any of those for you?
so I I always found the physical element of training in both occasions, you know, hard but achievable. I never really felt out of my depth physically, uh, by and large.
Yeah, I know
Um,
what you mean.
and so it wasn't the mile 24 of the 30 miler that I suddenly realized that this is horrendous. And you know, for
Yep.
me, it was the moments in between. It's always there's a quote from Churchill, and I'm sure I'll get it wrong, but it's in my life I have experienced many great trials and tribulations, most of which never happened. And I
Mm,
think
it's good.
it's the anticipation, it's the sitting, waiting for something that you think may or may not happen that can really play on your mind. Um, and then if it does happen, it tends to not be as bad as you were expecting. And then, but a lot of the time, it just never happens anyway. And so I think often the hardest times for me have been the quiet moments in between when you're left to your own thoughts and you are also absolutely exhausted and
Mm,
hungry and tired and cold and wet. And then that's just your baseline experience of being in the
yeah.
field, essentially. But then when you overlay a failure on top of that, your mind really starts to, um, really go into a dark place. And that's something to understand, actually, both as an individual and as a leader. When you experience some sort of failure, um, it really rocks your self-confidence. You start to question whether you should be here, whether you deserve to be here, whether you're just a burden on your team. And as a result, your performance uh, takes a drop, takes a hit, and that leads to another failure,
Mm,
which then reinforces everything your mind is telling you about why you shouldn't be here anyway.
mm,
And one of the greatest things that you can learn as a Marine, but also I think in life, is how to fail, how to take a step back and acknowledge that failure, examine where you went wrong, understand how you're not going to do it again, but but also very importantly, prevent that from resulting in another failure. Now, as an individual, you need to stop that downward spiral of defeat. That's what I call it. And that's very, very difficult when you're absolutely exhausted. And that's where teamwork comes in. But also that's where good leadership comes in. You know, as an officer, I remember you would have guys who were perhaps underperforming in some way. And someone would do something stupid, right? They would forget their helmet when they were going to the range, or, you know what I mean? Just things like that. And they would take a ribbing from the team, and one of the corporals would be like, you know, numbnuts over there, that's the second time he's forgotten his helmet, or something like that, right? And then you can see that individual just starting to like mentally wilt and be like, oh my goodness, like, you know, I am, you know, because we're guys who acknowledge, you know, like the whole group is now regarding me as like the group idiot. Like, I can't be the only one that's right, you know. And I've been in that position myself. And anyway, so and as a leader, it's your job and your responsibility to identify that moment where that person is tipping into that downward spiral of defeat, and reach out to him and throw him a line and give him an opportunity to regain his confidence, and give him an opportunity to establish himself within himself and within the group as someone who's competent, and then he'll be back on track. So there was a famous story, and I'll get all the details wrong, but gentleman has got his own private plane, and he comes into land to refuel. Now, this young lad comes out, fuels his plane up, and sends him on his way. Like 5 minutes later, the engine splutters to a stop, and the pilot just has just enough height and momentum to turn around and land back on the runway. And he examines the problem, and it turns out that young lad had put the incorrect fuel. He'd put like diesel in when he should have put petrol in. And so he goes over to the young lad and says, you know, basically, you almost just killed me because you weren't paying attention to what fuel you were putting in my plane. And clearly the young lad is absolutely mortified that he'd nearly killed this guy. And so what the man does is says, right, I want you to go and fix this problem and refuel my plane, and I'll be on my way. And what that does is, and the reason he does that is because he now knows that young man is the least likely person to ever make that mistake ever again. And what that does is it immediately gives that young man an opportunity to regain his own confidence in his ability to do his job, because he will never make that mistake again. And that would have tormented him for forever had the pilot not said, right, now you've made that mistake, and I now know, and now you won't do that again, and I'll trust you. And so that's what you need to do as a leader, is identify those moments where someone needs an opportunity to regain fast. Otherwise, they're going to step into a negative headspace. That's a long way of explaining what my, you know, hardest moments were as a recruit. But I think without being able to necessarily, there were some pretty horrendous mistakes I made as a recruit, actually. Not just as a recruit. I've made mistakes at every stage along my career, frankly. But to the best of my ability, I've learned how to handle those mistakes and how to prevent them from developing into a catastrophic sort of failure inability. And so I'll quickly talk about the hardest moments in officer training. I think you know, yomping is something, you know, I've always sort of prided myself in being quite a strong yomper. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm never going to be at the back of the pack. And it's funny because all you need is someone else to be suffering more than you, and you feel fine. And I remember yomping along on a very difficult sort of cumulative exercise in the Black Mountains, and no joke, our Bergens weighed, best part of 140 pounds, and we were walking for 5 days. And I remember patrolling along, and I looked at the man. I turned around to look at the man behind me, and I looked at the man in front of me, and they were both in tears. They were both shuffling along, crying to themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, no judgment here, because you can cry as long as you carry on.
Yeah.
Like, that's down to you. Like, I respect that. If you need to have a little sob to yourself to get you through the rest of the day, you crack on. Just don't ask me to carry any more gear.
Yeah.
And that was very physically hard. And I remember the batch officer, who's like the chief officer who like takes you through officer training, and he said to me, "It's like, Alexander, what would you be doing on a Wednesday morning if you weren't here?" I remember just saying, "Well, I'm pretty sure Jeremy Carl's on, actually." Because that's probably what I'd have been doing if I wasn't yomping up that mountain. I'd be in the naffy watching Jeremy Kyle.
Yeah. But
so yeah, there's some hard. Go for it.
Is those hard times make, not necessarily Jeremy Kyle, but make the easier times so pleasurable?
Oh my goodness.
Like, compared to not earning pleasure is not enjoyable. Earning pleasure is amazing. I remember Chris, mention him again, the SBS operator. I remember we were driving through Dartmoor one day. We were just going out or whatever, and he said every time it's raining and wet, he'll turn his heating up in his car a little bit more, because he remembers all the times he's been out in weather like this. And I do it as well now in the car. I'm like, agreed. I look out and I'm like, and I always think somewhere there's like some nod who's like looking up to his eyeballs in a puddle, and I'm here in like in a nice warm car and stuff like that. But even now when I'm in my bed and it's a really it's blowing outside and it's peeing wet, I snuggle myself in my bed a little bit more, and I'm like, I remember all those times where I was out in that, and it makes it. But if you haven't earned it, it's not as sweet.
Totally, and I think the kind of people that are attracted to the Marines are those who wish to experience the breadth of what life has to offer to the most extreme degrees, and inclusive of fear. And suffering. Absolutely.
Yep.
It's very difficult to explain to people who aren't in that headspace, why you want to go to war so badly. They don't understand that there's a big part of you who you just. Now, I believe that there is a question etched on the heart of every man, and that is, do you have what it takes?
Yeah.
And we are always looking to answer that question. And that can manifest in very positive or very negative ways. And I have the question, do I have what it takes to step up to the ultimate challenge, which is to go and face someone who wants to kill me and kill them instead?
Yeah.
It's a somewhat primal kind of very, very deeply seated, I don't know if I can really unpack it philosophically, but there's a desire within us as men, and I can only speak for men because I am one, to pitch ourselves against the most extreme things that we can find in life and see if we endure. The Marines is a platform that affords you the opportunity to pitch yourself against the most extreme things that can be experienced as a human being. And I think that is absolutely one of the draws of it. And it's probably not one that's really spoken about very much, because it's not a palatable or even understandable draw. and yet it's a powerful motivation for those who you find stood next to you in the Corps, for sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this culture has lied to, well, everyone, but especially the young generation, that suffering is wrong, suffering is bad. And to stay away from it. I think we alluded to this earlier, but I think that without suffering, without those hard times, life isn't as sweet. It's like, I can definitely vouch for that. In times where I've had, like, say, a 2-year hiatus from pain, it actually becomes really miserable. And I don't, and like you just said there, I don't have the philosophical answer as to why, but I think that part of it is obviously that, like, and I agree with you that men have this, have I got it what it takes on my heart, and that's something, that's why I boxed, that's why I joined the Marines, that's why I do mad challenges every 6 months when I'm feeling like I haven't achieved anything in a while. And
I had a barbecue last night, and one of the guys was like, Dan, sometimes I just feel like I was born in the wrong era.
Yeah,
I'm like stacking shelves when really I should be swinging a battle axe on some massive battlefield. I should be a Viking. But I'm stacking shelves in Walmart.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Like if I was born in another time, I'd be like, I'd be conquering.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not something we get to decide, and so you don't get to cop out. You know, but that's why we joined the Marines, right?
Yeah.
We can't go and be a Viking, but I'm sure be the closest thing to a Viking I can be. And that's a Royal Marine Commando.
I can't grow a beard, so I can't be a Viking, but I can be a Royal Marine because you have to be clean shaven.
For now.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I mean, where do we go from here? There's so much. So many cool stuff we could talk about. What would you say? Okay, here's a question for you. We get asked this question a lot. I want to join the Royal Marines, but I'm not sure whether something draws me towards the officer route, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
What would you say to those guys?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah.
Sorry, here's a back end part to that question. They go but I want to be one of the lads as well, is what they'll say.
Yeah. Yeah. Cake and eat it. Let me think about that for 1 second. So I guess there's an appeal to being, people probably feel drawn to being an officer because you're a commando and you're a leader, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be of an intellectual standard and academic standard, and that's all great stuff. But then also there's a big part of you who just wants to be a part of the wolf pack, be a part of the gang, and not have a responsibility. So it's kind of, there's a conflict in a sense, because you want all the fun stuff, and you want all the benefit of responsibility, all the benefit of being an officer. But often people fail to understand the responsibility that underpins that. Yeah. And so what do I think about whether or not to be an officer? Yeah, you've got to, again, it really goes back to what's your spectrum of reasons. Okay. So I stepped into the domain of officership because I saw that as a means as a platform that would better enable me to influence the things I cared about in life, and take on a leadership position and steer the ship in a particular direction, right? However, if you're just interested in, it's like, imagine a construction site. You've got, if this is a good example, you've got the project manager, okay, who's overseeing forget the construction side. Let's talk about an orchestra. You've got I want to be a part of an orchestra, but I can't decide whether to be the conductor or play an instrument.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to play the violin and become the best in the world at being a violinist, swap that out for sniper, right? Go and be a sniper.
Yeah.
Go and learn everything there is about sniping and be the best sniper that you can be, you know. But don't think that you're then going to step into the conducting, right? And so what happens is there are certain benefits of being a conductor, right? Of being an officer, but that means that you're never going to deeply specialize in sniping, right? But if all you wanted to do was play an instrument or be a sniper, then go and do that, and understand what the roles entail. So, does that make sense? It's not a particularly.
It does. Do you say, like, so for the back end of that question, are you one of the lads as an officer? Like, are you one of the lads in the officers' mess? Like, does it work the same way? Because I think you've answered that really, really nicely. You know, the orchestra analogy.
Yeah. So imagine you have an orchestra, right? And there's like 6 violinists, right? And the violinists having a great time playing their violin, and they're looking to the conductor to know when they're supposed to, you know, chime in. And then, but the conductor's just like, oh, you know, those violinists are having a great time. They've got, you know, I'm up here on this stage all alone, and those violinists, you know, they just have such a great sort of cohesive, you know, unified time. I'm going to step off my platform and go and sit with the violinists, right? And the violinists are like, oh wow, the conductor thinks we're cool and wants to be one of us. This is cool. But then when it's time to actually play, the violinists are like, hang on, wait a second, like, this is great, you know, it's great to have you here, conductor, but like, are you going to conduct? Because this is not working. But you know, and then the whole orchestra is just like, where's the conductor? Why is the conductor not conducting? Well, the conductor's not conducting because he's wanted to hang out with the violinists. Everything falls to pieces, right? And so stepping it up as a leader and as an officer, you've got to understand that you're going to be sat or stood in the conductor's seat. And you're going to be looked to perform and behave and conduct yourself as the conductor. And no matter how appealing it looks to go and hang out with the violinists and show them that actually you can play the violin pretty well too, they won't respect that. They won't respect you, and your orchestra will fall to pieces. And so there is a price to be paid for being an officer, and that is you're not going to be part of the wolf pack. You know, people talk about the loneliness of command, particularly as you get higher. That's a real thing. If you're a company commander way down the line and you're deployed as a company, the buck stops with you. You're it. And there's no one who can share the responsibility that you ultimately own. Yes, you have your team around you, and well-respected members of the team who can advise you in every way. You'll have a sergeant major who can even hold you accountable to a degree. But you own the risks, you own the responsibility for how things pan out, and that's a lonely place to be. And that is your job as an officer. That's why you get paid more. Everyone wants to be a leader until they see who eats last, and that is the officer. Do you see what I mean? And so understand what it is to be an officer, and understand what is it that you really want to do. Do you want to play a violin, or do you want to conduct? And don't think like that you can do both. Now, I will say that I'm probably taking this analogy probably a little bit too far, but the conductor has to understand all the different instruments within his orchestra. You know, he has to have a basic knowledge of how to play a violin and what a violin sounds like, so that he knows that the violinists need new violin strings, for example, right?
Yeah.
So as an officer, you are going to be trained to have a really broad appreciation of what every member of your team does. And what you do throughout officer training is you step into all those different roles so that you can experience that. But you're not going to develop deep specialist knowledge in any of those areas.
Yeah. I always think that with
go for it.
Yeah, I always think that with Padres, like who try to be like one of the lads, and it's like, and the lads go, oh, that Padres hoofing, isn't he? Like he come out and got lashed up with us, and it's like, great, but now are you going to go and get advice off that same guy, or are you going to go and share your deepest struggles with him? Probably not. And so now that Padres job has been diminished because he stepped out of his role. He stepped out of that line of authority, or that line of
and to be accepted in the immediacy by the group is a very seductive thing.
Yeah.
You just pay for it later in credibility. That's the reality. That is the reality.
No, it's
worth
really,
thinking,
really good
worth
insight.
thinking about before you choose.
My officer out in Afghan was a guy called T. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, no.
And he was straight out of the box actually, but he was. I had a lot of respect for him. He was on every single patrol, and what I liked about him was he would give the orders like, so right lads, this is what we're going to do today. But then at the end, he'd say, right, does anyone have anything that they want to add, or anything that you don't agree with? And we actually had a voice, and we were allowed to say, like, no, I was a 2-year Marine, and I'll be able to say, yeah, boss, I think that this is maybe a better approach. And if it genuinely was a better approach, he would go, yeah, Roger, all right, well, we'll implement that. So, but he was very clearly in charge, and there was a very clear definition of he isn't one of the lads.
Yeah, because he could accept what you're saying, but then he also has to own the consequences of employing what you've said. So he's got to make judgments.
He couldn't turn around and go, oh, fucking Marine Logan, this was your plan, and like, look at what's happened. It's like, you're the boss. Exactly. You said it was a good plan.
Mate, can we take a pause?
Yeah.
And also, I want to get a wet.
Right, so on my Instagram, I asked loads of questions to the guys. Oh, nice. Very nice.
Company, the Delta dealers.
Good,
fine bunch of men. Well, they were when I was there, anyway.
It's all gone downhill now. So I asked, I said we were doing this interview today, and just got people to ask their questions. We'll just ask a few of them if you're happy with that, mate.
Go for it. Shoot.
So, how much of it is a desk job as an officer?
Good question. So, experiences may differ, and you do have a degree of say on that. So, the way it works is you have an officer that sits above your grade called the appointer. Now, he has oversight, he has visibility of all the different jobs that need to be filled within the Marines at your rank. Now, what job that you go into is a conversation you will have, a negotiation you will have with the appointer, with the caveat that he has the final say, and the needs of the service are what he's interested in primarily. And then second to that, he will try and align you with the job that you want in line with where you want to ultimately go. Now, those jobs are very broad in spectrum, and they consist of like training instructor positions, staff positions, to foreign deployments, really, really broad mix. And that's a conversation you can have with the appointer. So some of those jobs are more desk orientated, But the reality of sitting behind a desk in the military is different from reality of sitting behind a desk in like a bank, for example. Because as an officer, you're not going to be data entry or data analysis. You're not going to be tied to your chair for 9 hours a day. You'll have a desk, and then you have your outputs that you are required to deliver. For example, an intelligence summary based on information that you've received and that needs to be communicated, right? How you go about doing that is down to you. And so, yes, you'll be at a desk, but you'll be handling incredibly sensitive and interesting information and working out how that can be best communicated to those who need it on the ground, right? So that's, yeah, sure, that's a desk job. But the reality is it's so much more than a desk job. It's understanding communication. It's understanding what people need. It's understanding what you're being told. It's communicating with those to your left and the right, understanding where you sit within that team. And so, you're in as much as you're not going to be front of the stack kicking down doors, you'll be behind a desk at times, sure. But by no means does that mean that it's not a rewarding and interesting and engaging place to be.
Yeah.
And also, there comes a time in life, and I experienced this, because I've been at the front of the stack kicking doors in, and that's great fun. But there's also a big side of me who's actually far more interested, once I've done that, in understanding, where does the UK sit on the global stage? How do we posture ourselves to confront the threats that are emerging in the 21st century? Those are big questions that I am interested in answering, and interested in being a part of the team that is that is also interested in answering those questions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, sure, desk job, but on that desk, you're at the forefront of international foreign policy, depending on where you sat. So don't be intimidated by the idea of a desk job, unless the idea of having to apply your intellectual bandwidth intimidates you, which you shouldn't do anyway, because you're going to be a Marine, and we're in the business of understanding the context in which we find ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Quick one on the appointer. That's a pretty stressful job.
They call it a disappointer.
Yeah. He just shuts his eyes.
But he has a desk job, a very thankless desk job, and I've been very fortunate in my experience to. It's always been a positive conversation. You've got to remember this guy understands where you are, has been exactly where you are, has had to negotiate his job with an appointer before. So he's not out to be, difficult. He's very much part of the tribe as well. Yeah. So I wouldn't be put off by that, put it that way.
Does 10 grand go a long way? Really?
I mean,
notice you're wearing a Levi's shirt there, hey? You didn't get that from Aldi.
I'm not the appointer. Never have.
No one knows who the appointer is. He's okay, here's one that I don't know if you can answer this, because in fact I don't think you or me can answer this, but what is the best way to get your family to understand your decision? I think both families are on board. Am I right?
That's a really That's a great question. Not something I've personally had to deal with, but I've observed it from a distance. I think that's a case of understanding where your family is coming from, and trying to understand what their perception of the military is, and doing it anyway. Frankly.
100%. 100%.
But equally, I don't want to diminish the influence that a family and your domestic circumstances have. You know, you can have the most steely operator go to pieces because his wife or girlfriend at home is,
or both.
yeah, or
So,
both, are are not in the headspace they need to be. There's
yeah,
nothing that will
massively.
unravel a man more than domestic troubles,
Yeah, yeah.
for sure.
I on my tour, we lost a guy who had children, and I just, like, now that I'm in that position where I've got 3 children, I don't like, I don't know how lads do it. Like, I don't know how you can go out if
Yeah,
if I was going out to Afghan tomorrow with my 3 children, freaking out, I'd go AWOL. I wouldn't, but
yeah,
I don't know how they do it. Fair play to anyone who
yeah,
joins with children,
yeah,
and whole different ball
yeah.
game.
It's not something I'm really in a position to comment on because I've basically been a single man for the entire time, and I very much believe it's a single man's game.
100%, 100%. It's the creme de la creme. Yeah, I would say always listen to your parents unless they're telling you not to join. No, I think. Should I be worried that my parents were buzzing when I joined? Like, my mum was like absolutely buzzing. Like, you're
Especially
putting
as that was the
yourself.
height of the Afghan days as
Yeah.
well.
What? You're going to join
Like
an elite organization where your life will potentially be at risk.
prematurely ended.
I'm so proud of you. Go.
Yeah,
Still here, mum.
mothers.
Still here.
Yeah, my mum was very chilled out as well. Very, very chilled out. Always has been, and I'm very grateful for that because it means that I haven't had to worry about her worrying.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an individual journey, that side of things, and yeah,
I think
it's a tough
I
one.
think it would be hard if like, say, my son or I've got daughters, and like if they wanted to join, I'd struggle with it. But if I had a son who wanted to join the Royal Marines, I think it'd be really, really hard because of the risks. But I think what I would find harder than seeing him risk his life is
Seeing
him,
him lock himself in the basement and play Call of Duty.
yeah, and literally live a life of unfulfilled potential. I think that would break me as a dad.
I think I'd be disappointed. I'd be like, what have I done wrong if my
Yeah.
son doesn't want to join the corps? To be honest. Or the army. That's okay.
Especially when
I
his
mean, I'll
middle
even
name
settle
is.
for the Navy.
Yeah. Yeah. But the RAF and the adoption. My brother's in the RAF, so my dad's thoroughly disappointed. What we've said that. It's a really good question.
Oh.
No, I think you'll enjoy answering this. Did you prefer being an officer or a junior rank?
That's a great question. Did I prefer being an officer or a junior rank? I preferred being an officer because I felt as a Marine that there were aspects to me that were not being employed.
Yeah.
I felt that I had more to give intellectually, in terms of, and there were ways in which I wanted to develop as a man, as a human being, that were not going to be developed as a junior rank. Absolutely, your leadership's developed as a junior rank, absolutely, and your decision making, all that sort of stuff. But I had interests that probably went above the level at which a junior rank has influence, and therefore I stepped up to be an officer, and then found myself in an environment where I had the intellectual freedom and the reason to, and the social group as well that were engaged in the things that I wanted to be engaged with, and therefore I felt more fulfilled. So I felt more fulfilled as an officer, I think.
Yeah.
Which is not to diminish how much fun I had as a Marine. You know, there's great pleasure and to be gleaned from, you know, having a reduced level of responsibility and just seeking to be the best you can be within your immediate sort of responsibilities. Absolutely. But I didn't mean I wanted to stay there though. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I wanted to progress.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things about being a junior rank is that you're never in the know. So you're the last to get told what's going on, and for someone who wants the bigger picture, it's quite a hard position to be in. And speaking as your friend, you were always suited being an officer way more than a junior rank. You were never someone who was going to just settle for that. You wanted to be the man in the know, the man who makes those decisions. And it was the natural conclusion for you to go officer.
Yeah, and that, you know what, that's what the Marines is great at, though. You know, it's great at identifying where someone will be suited and steering them in that direction. And the reason it's great at that is because it is an organization that values leadership and has excellent leaders in it.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't wake up one morning and decide to, you know, drive back to Lympstone. That potential within me had to be identified by, you know, the leadership team within the company that I was in. They then had to action a whole administrative process in support of me. They then had to develop me into someone who could pass the selection processes. And so it wasn't just me that, you know, so the organization and the values that the organization holds were very much reflected in the way that I was identified as someone who could probably be a good officer, and then they made it happen.
Yeah.
And that's because it's an organization that actually on a team level like that cares about the individual. You, as an officer, the officers do care about where their guys go.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm very grateful for those who were in a position above me, who looked down and identified that and steered me in that direction. Great leadership.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be seeking to do as leaders: develop those who we are responsible for.
Yeah, definitely. Which leads into another question here, which actually I'm quite interested in. So, you know, for some time, I know you wrestled with the idea of going officer when you were already a Marine. What did the process look like? So, because I have a rough idea of how it works, but can you talk us through that?
If you're a civilian, you go through a couple of interviews, fitness tests, all that kind of stuff, and then instead of doing a PRMC, which doesn't exist anymore anyway, you do a POC, which is a potential officers course. I think they still do this. I'm pretty out of date.
OSC, I think it's called now.
Officer candidate, no, officer selection course. I don't know, but anyway, so back when I went through, you do like a 4-day sort of fitness tests and presentations and all that sort of stuff at CTC, and then you do an Admiralty interview board, which was a formal interview with the Navy to see if you were capable, you know, suitable to be an officer. And then you enter a pool of people who have passed that process, and then they skim off the top 50 essentially. And so going into that process as someone who's already in the Marines, I went through exactly the same thing. The only thing I missed was the medicals, because clearly I was already medically fit. So you go through the POC, you go and have an interview with the Admiralty interview board, and then you also then sit in that pool of candidates that they can choose from each year. And you either make it or you don't. And you know, here I am. obviously made the cut.
And your troop commander, obviously you have to approach him and ask his permission to go for it, I imagine, a bit like selection. Not really.
Permission. It's a conversation you have. I remember him having the conversation with me. And he approached me one day. It was probably, you have 6 monthly sort of performance appraisals where you have a formal interview, as you know, with your troop commander. And I would imagine, I can't remember, he probably would have raised it then. He would have been like, look, Dan, you've got a good report. Have you considered applying for officer? You know, because if you wanted to do that, we would support you.
Yeah.
And I think that actually happened a year before I decided to go for it. We were all about to deploy, and he said, you know, we think you might make a good officer candidate. How do you feel about that? And at the time, I was looking forward to going away, and I was like, yeah, I'll consider that in the back of my mind for the next, you know, until I get back. And so I deployed, and then when I got back, had the conversation again, and then okay, cool, yeah, we'll do it. And it was a very smooth process for me because I was already in. I think I applied in April, formally applied in April, and then was on the batch by September. It was very smooth. Yeah, it was very, very quick. But you know, it's somewhat of, and as I said, it's very rare. It doesn't happen very often. You know, couple of guys a year. So for those wondering, do I join the Marines and then become an officer like I did? Big part of me thinks make a decision and either go officer or don't. Don't do what I did. It's very inefficient. Equally, you know, sometimes you're not, like in my case, I wouldn't have been ready to be an officer straight away. But what I would say to that is, you know, there are other things you can do to get ready. You don't have to spend 3 years in the Marines. You could go and get a job. You could go traveling.
Yeah.
You could go to university. There are other options. Do you see what I mean?
Massively.
Think about it.
Yeah.
And equally, you know, university isn't the holy grail either.
No.
Don't feel that you know, we are somewhat infatuated with the idea of going to university, and it absolutely has its place, but certainly not for everyone. And I think if you're going to go to university, understand what exactly it is that you want to achieve from university, and ask the question, does this support exactly what I want to be doing, rather than going for lack of anything better to do, because you can always go later.
Yeah, true. And I think also for those joining the Royal Marines, and maybe if you're listening and you're in the Marines, have an idea of what you want to do when you leave as well. Even if you're like, right, I'm going to do 18 years. Throughout that 18 years, start thinking about what is it you want to do when you come out. Because
that's a great point.
Yeah, you had a plan, didn't you? Like within reason.
I wouldn't necessarily say I had a plan, but I had a vision of what my life would look like. And that's important because that can steer the decisions you make even without a specific plan. I remember, so when you apply it, when you submit your notice to leave the military, you've got a year before you actually leave, and you go on this like resettlement workshop. And I remember about at least a year ago now, going on that, and it was predominantly those who had been in for a full career and who were essentially being spat out the other end without an extension. And the whole experience was essentially a counseling session for those people who had not come to terms with the idea that their beloved organization would spit them out, didn't want them anymore. And I was left thinking, guys, like, you've known for 22 years that this date was in your calendar, that at this point in time you were going to get spat out, and the military would cease to care about you. And it's the reality of confronting the reality that yes, you are a number. No, the organization doesn't care about you, and yes, you are now leaving. And you've got to have that in the back of your mind throughout your career,
Yeah.
because you can't stay forever, and you have to be very intentional about when you leave and how you leave and what you go and do.
Yeah.
I didn't know precisely what I wanted to do when I left. I'm still sort of wondering now, really, where I'm going to end up. But I think, yeah, you don't necessarily have to answer the question specifics, but you have to bear in mind that you will leave, and you need to shape the time that you leave, sort of intelligently, if that makes sense.
Definitely. It's good, mate.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd say let's make this the last one. Sorry, where is it? It was a good one. Here's a good question. I think you'll appreciate it. What can I be doing now in my spare time to make myself / application better for the role?
What role are we talking about?
So I think he wants to join the Marine as an officer.
Oh, as an officer.
So he's a civvy lad.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends what's going on in life, doesn't it? I mean, where are you weakest? You know, are you unfit, or are you?
Yeah, I'll ask him now. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a good grounding in what's going on in the world and where the UK sits within that? Do you see what I mean? So it's really, in order to answer that for himself, he needs to really understand what it is that he's stepping into, and then that will shape how he spends his time and how he seeks to develop himself. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, massively.
And I know your platforms are quite physically orientated.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was my issue when I joined. I mean, I did my PRMC. I won best recruit, but it was literally just fitness. So I was overdeveloped in my fitness and underdeveloped in many other areas. One being admin.
It's easy to get fixated on the physical side of things.
Yes, and it's really not the biggest thing. I mean, it's a massive part of it.
It's essential, and it has to be there, but it has to underpin everything else, essentially.
Yeah.
So, particularly as an officer, it's really has to just be a given.
Yeah.
It's the thing that enables everything else.
Yeah. The one thing I really get people to focus on is just getting a basic knowledge of map reading, because I think that goes a real long way for those initial stages.
Yeah, I agree to a degree. The thing I would say is I wouldn't worry too much, because the pipeline that you'll go through will teach you that stuff.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't get too hung up on trying to learn ahead of what you're going to be taught. I think, having a baseline of fitness and having a baseline understanding of what you're going into, it's really key, rather than trying to second guess what you're going to be taught, because you could end up teaching yourself wrong stuff and having to unlearn that. And
so all I say is the Royal Marines have map reading videos on YouTube. I just say watch through them once or twice, just so you know what a compass is and you know what an 8 grig, things like that. But don't worry, don't be out on North Wales
counting your paces through the clag, getting your altimeter out and being like, giving yourself a 10-figure grid reference.
Lads, I want your route cards to me by Monday morning.
Yeah.
Where's your backstop? You haven't got a backstop, right? After you have shift in Asda, I want you in my.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, mate. Any other sort of points from you? What?
I think I've gobbed off a lot there, mate.
I know. I probably won't speak for the next 3 days now.
Yeah, I needed that coffee.
Awesome, mate. Dan, thank you very much for giving your valuable time up to us, and you've obviously done it for the greater good of guys joining, and you know, that means a lot, and I know they'll appreciate that a lot as well. So thank you very much for that, mate. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And
cheers, dude.
Best of luck to all your candidates, clients.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Britt.